Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Welcome back to Module 2 of our Cleaning Validation series. Today, we are strictly zeroing in on the regulatory landscape. We're going to decode that dense alphabet soup of global regulations, FDA CGMP, EU GMP Annex 15, PICSIS, ICH, ISPE, ASTM, the whole shebang. And more importantly, we're going to translate what all those acronyms actually mean for your facility on a day-to-day basis. So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll map out the global regulatory framework, explore the massive shift towards science-based limits, talk about risk and lifecycle integration, look at some real-world compliance failures, and finally put you right in the hot seat to view things through the inspector's lens. All right, let's get into Part 1, the global regulatory framework. We'll take a look at the major players and how they interlock. Look, we are no longer living in a world of isolated jurisdictions. Regulators worldwide are cooperating more than ever. The FDA really sets the bedrock foundation, mandating written procedures and strict equipment inspections. But then, the European framework, through EU GMP Annex 15, heavily layers in risk-based expectations and worst-case rationales. And tying it all together is PICS, which acts as this incredible bridge, harmonizing inspection standards across more than 50 different global regulators. Now, compare a finished dose to an active pharmaceutical ingredient, or API. According to ICH-Q7, API cleaning validation is uniquely critical. Why? Well, because you aren't just looking at the final product. Carryover from a single intermediate stage in API manufacturing actually propagates downstream into multiple products. This means the criticality of your cleaning validation here is much, much higher than basic finished dose intuition might suggest. So how are you supposed to manage all these different rules? There is a golden rule for global compliance, and it's pretty simple. Because of mutual recognition through PIC/S, a finding in one jurisdiction easily propagates to the others. So your program absolutely must satisfy the strictest applicable global standard, not just the lowest common denominator. I mean, sure, the lowest common denominator approach might seem easier on paper, but it creates massive vulnerabilities during multi-region audits. It might save you time today, but it will literally cost you your global supply chain tomorrow. Okay, moving on to Part 2. Let's talk about the scientific shift to health-based exposure limits, or HBEL. This is arguably the most monumental regulatory shift in modern cleaning validation. The crucial point here is that regulations simply do not tolerate arbitrary limits anymore. Modern guidelines, like the EMA HBEL guideline, strictly require permitted daily exposure, or PD values. And you can't just pull these out of thin air. They have to be derived by qualified toxicologists based on actual data, specifically using the no observed adverse effect level. No more guessing. This completely grounds your cleaning validation in actual quantifiable patient impact. We have entirely shifted away from the outdated fraction approach. Remember that old 1 in 1,000th of a dose rule? Yeah, the 90s called and they want their math back. Today, you need a rigorously defended, science-backed HBEL standard. This methodology is exactly what withstands strict inspector scrutiny because it genuinely protects patients from cross-contamination using hard, verifiable science. Next up is Part 3, Risk and Lifecycle Integration. Let's see how guidelines turned a simple checkbox exercise into a continuous lifecycle. Using the ASTM E3106 standard practice alongside FDA guidance, your program has to follow a 3-stage lifecycle approach. It starts with process design, which involves your risk assessment and worst-case selection via ICH-Q9. Then it moves into process qualification with your executed runs. And finally, and most critically, it enters continued process verification, aligned with ICH-Q10. The absolute key word here is continued. You have to prove effectiveness is actively monitored, not just proven once and shoved in a drawer to collect dust. And listen, ICH Q9 and Q10 make it very clear. You cannot use generic risk templates. Say it with me. Generic risk language is an immediate regulatory red flag. Every single worst-case selection must have specific, documented scientific reasoning integrated right into your broader pharmaceutical quality system. Cleaning validation is not a silo. It has to talk directly to your change control, your CAPA, and yes, it must be reviewed by senior management as a systemic quality topic. All right, Part 4. What happens when we misinterpret these guidelines? Let's look at some real-world compliance failures. Picture this scenario. A multi-product oral solid manufacturer decides to completely ignore the EMA HBL guidelines. They just kept rolling over their 1 1,000th of a dose criteria from 1998, never updating it for modern standards. And they did this despite using shared equipment for high-potency compounds. Well, an EU inspector caught this pretty much instantly. When they compared those legacy limits to modern HBL-derived values, the actual carryover risk completely exceeded safe exposure limits. The result? An immediate critical finding that halted their entire manufacturing authorization. They were forced into a massive, panic-driven, and incredibly expensive revalidation program. The brutal lesson here is that legacy criteria require proactive, continuous review. Let's look at another major failure. A contract manufacturing organization, a CMO, completed an initial 3-batch validation, checked the box, and then just rubber-stamped their annual reviews with no changes year after year. But were there really no changes? The truth was, they performed exactly 0 active operational monitoring. Eventually, a customer audit uncovered this total lack of Stage 3 monitoring. Because cleaning effectiveness had gone completely unverified for years, the customer immediately suspended all production at the site. This brilliantly and painfully illustrates that a life cycle approach is not just a nice suggestion from the FDA or Annex 15, it's a literal commercial survival requirement. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5. I want to put you directly into the hot seat and look at your facility through the strict, unyielding lens of an auditor. Inspectors expect genuine audit readiness, and they expect it to be maintained continuously, not just frantically crammed a week before they show up. This means your validation master plan is highly visible and up to date. Your specific regulatory cross-references, whether that's FDA, Annex 15, or ICH Q7, are explicitly mapped to your controls, and critically, it means your staff actually understands the methodology and the regulations. So imagine an inspector sits down across from you and asks this exact question. How are your health-based exposure limits derived for your acceptance criteria? If your validation engineer just shrugs and says, I think we got the PD values from a supplier, without being able to articulate the toxicology methodology, the temperature in that audit room is going to drop immediately. They will probe deeper, and they will expose your organizational knowledge gaps. Here's another classic inspector trap. Show me your worst-case product and equipment rationale. If you just hand them a generic template that vaguely states worst-case selected without providing any hard scientific data to back it up, you will absolutely fail the inspector's challenge. Or what about this one? How do you verify continued cleaning effectiveness between validations? They're going to demand evidence of active monitoring. They want to know exactly how you handle deviations and residues that approach those scientific limits on a routine, totally average Tuesday, not just during the pristine, perfect conditions of your initial validation runs. To survive those kinds of questions, you have to adopt daily behaviors for compliance maturity. You need to routinely cite specific regulatory references in your documents. You need to launch gap assessments the very second new guidance drops. By building a cross-functional quality council, you actually treat regulators as partners in patient safety, demonstrating a proactive compliance culture rather than a reactive one. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Think about this carefully regarding your own facility. Are your multi-region controls designed to the strictest standard, and could your team successfully articulate your HBL methodology if an inspector walked in today? Because that answer dictates whether you are truly protecting patients with mature science, or if you're just passing time waiting for a warning letter.